She married a man. She didn't love to protect her daughter. Years later, the truth brought everyone to tears. Welcome back and enjoy the story. In the picturesque coastal town of Silverwater, where colorful houses cling to hillsides and the scent of salt mingles with coffee, a desperate mother makes the ultimate sacrifice. The evening sun cast long shadows across Fiona's apartment as she stared at the medical bills scattered across her kitchen table. The numbers blurred before her eyes, impossibly large and growing larger with each passing day. Her daughter Tara's laughter echoed from the small living room, where she played with worn stuffed animals, blissfully unaware of the weight crushing down on her mother's shoulders. The sound, usually Fiona's greatest joy, now pierced her heart with fear. The diagnosis had come 3 weeks ago, a rare kidney disorder requiring specialized treatment, ongoing medication, and possibly surgery. Without insurance, the mounting costs were astronomical, far beyond what Fiona could earn as a concert cellist with the local orchestra, even with additional private students and weekend gigs at upscale restaurants. "Mommy, look," Tara called, holding up a crayon drawing of what appeared to be the two of them, stick figures with oversized smiles and hearts floating above their heads. "It's us being happy forever." Fiona crossed the room and knelt beside her 5-year-old daughter, taking the drawing with trembling hands. Tara's copper curls bounced as she tilted her head, studying her mother's expression with eyes too perceptive for her age. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Fiona whispered, pulling Tara into a tight embrace to hide the tears threatening to spill. How could she tell her daughter that forever was the very thing she feared they might not have? The phone rang, startling them both. It was Dr. Mercer's office calling about scheduling Tara's next treatment, and, inevitably, about payment arrangements. Fiona sent Tara to prepare for bed, while she took the call in the kitchen, speaking in hushed tones so her daughter wouldn't hear the desperation in her voice as she begged for more time, more options, any path forward that didn't end with her daughter's health being sacrificed on the altar of financial limitation. After hanging up, Fiona leaned against the refrigerator, her reflection distorted in the chrome surface, much like her life had become distorted since the diagnosis. Her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Wilson Blake, the wealthy pharmaceutical executive she'd met at a charity event where she'd performed last month. He'd been persistent in his attention since then, sending flowers to her performances and coincidentally appearing at venues where she played. His message was simple: "I have a proposition for you, something that could help with Tara's medical situation. Dinner tomorrow, my driver can pick you up at 7. Fiona stared at the message, unease and desperate hope warring within her. How did he know about Tara's condition? She'd been careful not to share the details of her personal struggles with anyone outside her closest friends. And yet, as she glanced back at the bills on the table, then toward the bathroom where she could hear Tara singing her toothbrushing song, she found herself typing a single-word reply: yes. The following evening, after arranging for her neighbor, Mrs. Castillo, to watch Tara, Fiona found herself seated across from Wilson in a private dining room at Silverwater's most exclusive restaurant. The chandelier light caught in the silver threads of his impeccably tailored suit, just as it glinted off the crystal and fine china surrounding them. At 53, Wilson Blake was 20 years her senior, his dark hair graying tastefully at the temples, his posture emanating the confidence of a man accustomed to power and its exercise. "I'll come straight to the point," Wilson said after their entrees had been served and the staff had withdrawn. "I've admired you from afar for some time, Fiona. Your talent, your grace, your dedication to your daughter." He took a sip of wine, his eyes never leaving hers. "I understand Tara's medical situation is challenging." Fiona set down her fork, appetite vanishing. "How do you know about my daughter's condition?" "I make it my business to know things, particularly about people who interest me," Wilson replied smoothly. "One of my companies specializes in exactly the type of treatment Tara needs." "And why would that matter to you?" Fiona asked, though a sinking feeling told her she already knew. Wilson placed his napkin beside his plate and leaned forward. "I have a proposal for you, Fiona. A business arrangement, if you will, with benefits for us both." His voice remained even, as if discussing Nothing more significant than a weather forecast. Marry me, and I'll ensure Tara receives the best medical care available. All expenses covered. The finest specialists, cutting-edge treatments, whatever she needs. The restaurant's ambient noise seemed to fade away as Fiona processed his words. Marriage, but we barely know each other. Sometimes life's greatest opportunities arrive unexpectedly, Wilson countered. You need financial security and specialized medical care for your daughter. I need a wife who brings culture and elegance to my position in society. Your talent as a cellist, your natural grace, these are valuable assets in my world. You're talking about marriage as if it's a corporate merger, Fiona said, her voice barely above a whisper. Wilson's smile didn't reach his eyes. In many ways it is. The most successful marriages often are. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a small velvet box, placing it on the table between them. This isn't about romance, Fiona. It's about mutual benefit. You do understand that, don't you? As the box sat between them, unopened yet somehow already a weight around her neck, Fiona thought of Tara's drawing from the night before. Us being happy forever. What price would she pay for that forever? As the silence stretched between them, Fiona realized with a hollow certainty that she already knew her answer. The weeks that followed passed in a blur of activity that Fiona observed as if from a distance, detached from the whirlwind of wedding preparations, orchestrated entirely by Wilson and his efficient staff. She signed prenuptial agreements without reading the fine print, nodded at color schemes and floral arrangements without seeing them, and tried to explain to a confused Tara why they would be moving into Uncle Wilson's big house by the sea, after a special party where Mommy would wear a pretty dress. But will you still play your cello there? Tara had asked, her small face scrunched with concern. Of course, sweetheart, Fiona had replied, though Wilson had already made it clear that her performing days with the orchestra were to end. Private recitals for his business associates would be acceptable, even encouraged, but nothing that took her away from her new role as his wife for extended periods. The wedding was held on Wilson's estate, an architectural showcase perched on Silverwater's northern cliffs with panoramic ocean views. Fiona walked down the aisle in a designer gown that felt like armor rather than celebration, her smile fixed in place as firmly as the diamonds Wilson had fastened around her neck that morning. A wedding gift, he'd said, though the unspoken message was clear. She was an acquisition beautifully displayed. As she reached the altar and placed her hand in Wilson's, Fiona caught sight of Tara in her flower girl dress, beaming with excitement and childish delight at the fairy tale spectacle. In that moment, Fiona silently renewed her vow, not the one she would shortly speak aloud to Wilson, but the one that truly mattered, to protect her daughter at any cost. The reception flowed with champagne and orchestral music, guests from Wilson's extensive business and social networks circulating with curious glances at the new Mrs. Blake. Fiona's few friends in attendance, mostly fellow musicians, offered congratulations tinged with confusion and concern. The speed of the romance, the obvious disparity in age and status, the whispers about her suddenly abandoning her position with the orchestra, all fed speculation that Fiona weathered with practiced composure. You're doing beautifully, Wilson murmured as they moved through their first dance, his hand pressed firmly against the small of her back, guiding her movements just as he intended to guide her life. Everyone is impressed. Later that night, after Wilson had claimed his husbandly rights with methodical efficiency and fallen asleep, Fiona stood at the bedroom window, overlooking the moonlit ocean. The vastness of the water matched the emptiness inside her. Silently, her fingers moved, across the windowsill playing an invisible cello, muscle memory finding the notes to a mournful Chopin nocturne. This would be her refuge now, music played in silence, passion expressed in secret. For Tara, she reminded herself, all for Tara. If you are enjoying the story, type 5 in the comments and subscribe for more videos like this. If not, type Zephyr. It helps me create even better content for you. Continuing. The first weeks in Wilson's mansion unfolded with the precision of a military operation. Each morning, Fiona woke to find a schedule on her bedside table, detailing her appointments for the day. fitness sessions with Wilson's personal trainer, meetings with his household staff, fittings for the new wardrobe he'd commissioned, and social engagements requiring her presence as the newest ornament in his collection. Tara, meanwhile, flourished under the attention of specialists Wilson had arranged. Her color improved, her energy returned, and the fear that had shadowed Fiona's heart began to recede, replaced by a different kind of dread as she discovered the true nature of her new life. The mansion, for all its grandeur, operated as Wilson's personal kingdom, with surveillance cameras monitoring every room except the bathrooms. "For security," Wilson had explained when Fiona questioned their presence. "My position creates certain risks. You'll get used to them." But it wasn't just the cameras. It was the way her cell phone mysteriously reset itself, erasing contacts. Wilson deemed unnecessary connections to your previous life. It was how her emails and messages were screened by his personal assistant before reaching her. It was the subtle redirection whenever she suggested taking Tara to visit her old friends from the neighborhood or the orchestra. "You have a new position now," Wilson reminded her during one such conversation, his tone patient but unyielding. "The people you associate with reflect on me. I'm sure you understand." Gradually, Fiona's world contracted to the boundaries of Wilson's estate and the select social circles he approved. She became adept at anticipating his preferences, at shaping herself to fit the mold he'd created for his perfect wife. When Wilson was pleased, Tara received new books, special outings, indulgent treats. When Fiona failed to meet expectations, spoke too freely at a dinner party, questioned one of his business decisions, spent too long practicing her cello, rather than preparing for an event, Wilson's disapproval manifested in subtle ways that nevertheless made his message clear. 3 months into the marriage, Fiona found an unexpected ally in Harriet, the estate's longtime housekeeper, who had served Wilson's family for decades. A sturdy woman in her 60s with knowing eyes and capable hands, Harriet initially maintained a professional distance, but gradually began to offer small kindnesses. A cup of tea brought to Fiona's music room when she practiced, special. Treats prepared for Tara when the child was having difficult days. Quiet warnings about Wilson's moods. "The master has particular ways," Harriet said one afternoon as she and Fiona folded laundry together, an activity Wilson found oddly pleasing, his accomplished wife engaging in domestic tasks. His first wife never quite adjusted to them. Fiona's hands stilled on the fine linen napkin she was folding. "I didn't realize Wilson was married before." Harriet's eyes darted to the nearest camera, then back to the laundry. "Perhaps I've spoken out of turn. It was some time ago." That night, after Wilson had gone to his study for his customary evening work session, Fiona tucked Tara into bed in her lavish, princess-themed bedroom. "Mommy," Tara whispered, as Fiona smoothed her curls from her forehead. "Why do you look sad when you think no one's watching?" The question pierced Fiona like a knife. Had she failed so completely to shield her daughter from her inner turmoil? "What do you mean, sweetheart? I'm not sad. We have everything we need now." Tara's small hand reached up to touch Fiona's cheek. "Your eyes don't match your smile anymore. They used to dance when you smiled. Now they just look tired." Fiona gathered her daughter close, inhaling the sweet scent of her hair, fighting back tears. "Sometimes grown-ups get tired, that's all. But I'm happy because you're getting better, and that's what matters most." After Tara had fallen asleep, Fiona made her way to the mansion's library, a room she'd discovered Wilson rarely entered or monitored. Hidden among the leather-bound classics and business biographies, she found old local newspapers preserved in binders, meticulously organized by year. With trembling fingers, she began searching for any mention of Wilson's previous marriage. It took hours of careful searching, mindful of the time and the need to return to the master bedroom before Wilson completed his work. But eventually, Fiona found what she sought. A small article from 15 years earlier reporting the tragic disappearance of Catherine Blake, wife of pharmaceutical executive Wilson Blake, last seen at their Silverwater estate. The investigation had found no evidence of foul play, the article noted, with authorities speculating about possible mental health issues after interviewing Mr. Blake about his wife's increasingly erratic behavior. in the weeks before her disappearance. Fiona carefully replaced the binder, her mind racing. The next day, when Wilson was occupied with business calls, she sought out Harriet in the laundry room, one of the few places where the cameras had been deemed unnecessary. "You mentioned Wilson's first wife yesterday," Fiona said quietly, sorting napkins beside the older woman. "The one who disappeared." Harriet's hands stilled momentarily before resuming their methodical folding. "I shouldn't have spoken of it. The master doesn't like to be reminded." "Please," Fiona whispered. "I need to know." Harriet glanced toward the door, then sighed. Catherine was a lovely woman, an artist, painted watercolors of the coast. She came from money, old Boston family. Their marriage seemed perfect at first, just like... She trailed off, but the implication hung in the air between them. "What happened to her?" Fiona pressed. "Nobody knows for certain," Harriet replied, her voice barely audible. "She became withdrawn, anxious. The master said she was having emotional difficulties, seeing things that weren't there. Then one day she was gone. Her clothes still in the closets, her paintings in the studio, her car in the garage, just vanished." "And no one questioned that?" Harriet's expression darkened. "The master has significant influence in Silverwater, Mrs. Blake. The investigation was limited." The conversation ended abruptly as Wilson's personal assistant appeared in the doorway, announcing that Mr. Blake requested Fiona's presence for lunch with an important business associate. As Fiona followed the assistant through the mansion's marbled corridors, her mind spun with implications. The gracious home suddenly felt like a beautiful trap, its security systems less about keeping dangers out and more about keeping her in. That evening, Wilson informed Fiona that they would be hosting a major charity gala the following month. "The Silverwater Children's Hospital benefit," he explained over dinner, cutting his steak with precise movements. "It's an important event for my public image, especially with the new contract negotiations underway." "Of course," Fiona agreed, taking a sip of water to wash down the anxiety rising in her throat. "What will you need me to do?" Wilson smiled, pleased with her compliance. "Your cello will be the centerpiece of the entertainment. I've commissioned a special piece from composer Thomas Ellison. You're familiar with his work, I believe. You'll perform with accompaniment from the Silverwater String Quartet." For the first time in months, genuine excitement flickered within Fiona. The opportunity to perform, to lose herself in music again. It felt like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. "That sounds wonderful," she said, unable to keep the enthusiasm from her voice. "I thought you'd be pleased," Wilson replied, studying her reaction with the same careful attention he gave to financial reports. "You've been adapting well to our arrangement. This is your reward." In the weeks that followed, Fiona threw herself into preparing for the performance. The music room, previously a sanctuary used in stolen moments, became her authorized domain. For several hours each day. Wilson even arranged for the quartet to rehearse at the mansion, though always under his watchful eye or that of his assistant. The commissioned piece was challenging and beautiful, requiring technical precision and emotional depth. As Fiona practiced, Tara would often sit quietly in the corner of the music room, drawing or reading, occasionally looking up with a smile when her mother conquered a particularly difficult passage. These moments, Fiona with her cello, Tara, nearby the music flowing between them, became islands of authenticity in the carefully controlled performance that was their new life. The night before the gala, Wilson entered the music room during Fiona's practice session. He stood silently, listening as she worked through a complex section of the piece, her body swaying with the music, momentarily free from the rigid posture and careful expressions she maintained in his presence. "You're quite extraordinary when you play," he said when she finished, crossing to where she sat with her cello. "It's like watching a different woman emerge." Fiona lowered her bow, unsettled by the intensity of his gaze. "Music has always been my escape." "Escape?" Wilson repeated, testing the word, an interesting choice of term. He reached out to touch a strand of her hair that had come loose during her playing. "Tell me, Fiona, are you happy here?" The question hung between them, dangerous, in its simplicity. Fiona knew what he wanted to hear, what answer would keep Tara's treatments coming, What response would prevent his mood from darkening? "I'm grateful for everything you've done for Tara," she replied carefully. "Her health has improved so much under your care." Wilson's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "That wasn't what I asked." "I'm adjusting," Fiona amended. "Learning my role." "Your role," Wilson echoed, his hand moving from her hair to grip her shoulder, not painfully but with unmistakable possession, "is to be exactly what I need, when I need it. Tomorrow night I need you to dazzle my guests, to be the accomplished musician and gracious hostess, to make everyone believe that our marriage is a love match rather than, what did you call it once? A corporate merger." His fingers tightened, briefly before releasing her. "Can you do that for me, Fiona?" "Yes," she whispered, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Good." Wilson straightened, adjusting his cufflinks. "I've invited someone special to tomorrow's event, Dr. Louis Chen, the specialist who's been consulting on Tara's case. I thought you might like to thank him personally for his exceptional care." Fiona's heart quickened. "That's thoughtful of you." Wilson smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I thought so. You haven't had the opportunity to discuss Tara's treatment plan in detail, have you? Dr. Chen can update you on her progress. The next steps, after all, her well-being is why we're here, isn't it?" The implied threat hung in the air as Wilson left the music room. Fiona sat motionless, the cello still cradled between her knees, the weight of her choices pressing down upon her. Tomorrow she would meet the doctor treating her daughter, the man whose expertise she had trusted without question. Tomorrow she would learn whether that trust had been misplaced. The charity gala transformed the mansion's grounds into a wonderland of lights and luxury. Crystal chandeliers hung from silk-draped pavilions erected on the lawn, while musicians played softly, as guests in formal attire mingled beneath the stars. Fiona moved through the crowd on Wilson's arm, the custom-designed gown he'd selected flowing around her like liquid silver, her smile fixed in place as firmly as the diamond choker circling her throat. "You're doing beautifully," Wilson murmured, echoing his words from their wedding night as they greeted another couple, a senator and his wife, key supporters of Wilson's latest pharmaceutical venture. "Everyone is impressed by how quickly you've taken to your role." Fiona nodded, playing her part with practiced precision, all the while scanning the crowd for Dr. Chen. Finally, Wilson guided her toward a distinguished Asian man in his 50s, standing somewhat apart from the main gathering. "Dr. Chen," Wilson called, extending his hand, "I'm so pleased you could join us tonight. Allow me to introduce my wife, Fiona." The doctor's handshake was firm, his expression professionally, warm yet guarded. "Mrs. Blake, it's a pleasure to finally meet you in person. Your daughter is a remarkable young lady." "Thank you for everything you've done for Tara," Fiona replied, searching his face for, what? Complicity? Deception? "Her improvement has been miraculous." "Hardly miraculous," Wilson interjected smoothly. "Just the result of proper care and resources, which Dr. Chen has expertly provided." A subtle tension rippled between the men, something Fiona might not have noticed months ago before she'd learned to read the micro-expressions that signaled Wilson's true feelings beneath his polished exterior. "Perhaps you could give Mrs. Blake an update on Tara's progress," Wilson suggested, his tone making it clear this was not merely a request. "I need to speak with the mayor about the hospital fundraising campaign." As Wilson moved away, Fiona seized her opportunity. "Would you mind if we stepped outside for a moment, Dr. Chen? The pavilion is a bit warm." They moved to a quieter section of the garden, still visible from the party but beyond immediate earshot. Up close, Fiona could see the fatigue lines around the doctor's eyes, the slight nervousness in his movements. "Dr. Chen," she began carefully, "I've been wanting to thank you personally for Tara's care, but I realize I've never actually seen her detailed medical records or treatment plans. Wilson handles all of that." Chen's expression flickered. "Mr. Blake is very thorough in his management of Tara's care." "Yes, he is," Fiona agreed, watching the doctor closely. "Almost as if he has a personal stake in her condition." The doctor glanced toward the pavilion where Wilson was engaged in animated conversation with the mayor. "Mrs. Blake, I'm not sure what you're asking." I'm asking about my daughter's prognosis, Fiona said quietly. About the necessity of the treatments she's receiving. About why a child who supposedly has a serious kidney disorder is showing such remarkable improvement with minimal intervention. Dr. Chen's professional mask slipped momentarily, revealing something like guilt or perhaps fear. Your husband has been very specific about Tara's treatment protocol. If you have questions about it, perhaps— I'm asking you, Fiona interrupted, her voice low but intense. As Tara's mother and as a woman who made life-altering decisions based on the severity of her condition, how serious is her kidney disorder, really? The moment stretched between them, taut with unspoken understanding. Finally, Chen sighed, the sound barely audible above the distant music from the pavilion. Tara has Bartter syndrome, he said, his voice clinical but gentle. It's a real condition that does require monitoring and some medication. But it's a manageable disorder, Mrs. Blake. With proper care, children with Bartter syndrome typically lead normal, healthy lives. It's not— He hesitated. It's not immediately life-threatening, Fiona finished for him, the confirmation of her growing suspicions hitting her like a physical blow. Not the catastrophic condition I was led to believe. I can't speak to what you were told, Chen replied carefully. I've only been consulting on Tara's case since your marriage. Mr. Blake approached me specifically because of my research in pediatric kidney disorders, but the emergency that necessitated expensive, specialized treatment immediately, Fiona pressed. The crisis that Wilson said required resources beyond anything I could provide. Chen's silence was answer enough. Fiona's mind raced, pieces falling into horrifying alignment. Wilson had manipulated her, exaggerating Tara's condition to create the perfect leverage. Had he somehow arranged for her financial difficulties as well? How long had he been orchestrating this trap? Mrs. Blake, Chen said quietly, interrupting her thoughts. Your husband is a powerful man in the medical community. His companies fund significant research, including my own. I've said more than I should already. I understand, Fiona replied, her composure returning even as her internal world shattered. Thank you for your honesty. As they turned back toward the pavilion, Fiona caught sight of Wilson watching them, his expression pleasant, but his eyes cold and assessing. She smiled brilliantly in his direction, playing her role perfectly even as determination crystallized within her. The truth had changed everything, yet on the surface, nothing could change. Not yet. Not until she found a way out that safeguarded Tara. Fiona's performance that evening was transcendent, her cello singing with emotions too complex and dangerous to express in words. The audience rose in a standing ovation when she finished, Wilson beaming with proprietorial pride beside her. He never suspected that what they had witnessed was not just artistry, but the awakening of her resolve. The following day was Silverwater's annual summer festival, when the entire town celebrated with music, food, and traditional dances along the harbor. Colored lanterns lined the streets and bobbed on boats in the marina, creating a magical atmosphere that drew visitors from surrounding communities. Wilson, recognizing an opportunity to enhance his public image, had agreed to sponsor a portion of the festivities and insisted that Fiona and Tara accompany him. For the first time since their marriage, Fiona found herself in public without Wilson's constant supervision. The crowded festival, with its winding streets and throngs of celebrants, provided moments of relative privacy as Wilson was pulled into conversations with local officials and business associates. Tara, delighted by the festivities, darted between vendor stalls and performance areas, forcing Fiona to follow at a distance that gradually separated her from Wilson's watchful presence. Fiona? Is that really you? The voice came from behind her as she watched Tara admiring a street performer's juggling act. Turning, Fiona found herself face to face with Daniel Morgan, the concertmaster from her former orchestra. His familiar face, lined with concern, sent a wave of emotion through her so powerful she nearly stumbled. "Daniel," she breathed, automatically, glancing around to ensure Wilson wasn't nearby. "It's wonderful to see you." "We've all been worried about you," he said, lowering his voice. "The way you disappeared from the orchestra, then suddenly married. Are you all right?" The simple question, the first time anyone had asked it without Wilson present to hear her answer, nearly broke Fiona's carefully maintained composure. She hesitated, then changed course. Tara was ill. The marriage provided her with medical care she needed. Daniel's expression darkened with understanding. So the rumors were true. But Fiona, there were other options. The orchestra's emergency fund grants for musicians with medical crises. We would have helped. I didn't know, Fiona whispered, the realization that she might have had alternatives striking her anew. Had Wilson deliberately isolated her from such possibilities? "Mom, look at the boats!" Tara called, running back to grab Fiona's hand and pull her toward the harbor, where small craft decked with lanterns were preparing for the evening water parade. Daniel glanced down at Tara, then back at Fiona. "She looks well." "She is," Fiona confirmed, her voice tight. "Better than I was led to believe she could be." Understanding passed between them, years of friendship allowing Daniel to read between her careful words. "Fiona, if you need help, Wilson's voice cut through the crowd as he approached, his smile pleasant but his eyes sharp with displeasure. "I've been looking everywhere for you." Tara wanted to see the boats, Fiona explained, her mask of contented wife sliding back into place. Wilson's gaze shifted to Daniel, recognition and immediate dislike evident in his expression. "Mr. Morgan, isn't it?" "From the orchestra." "Mr. Blake," Daniel acknowledged, with a stiff nod. "I was just catching up with Fiona. We've missed her talent at our performances." "I'm sure," Wilson replied, placing a possessive hand at the small of Fiona's back. "But my wife's skills are now reserved for more select audiences." The implied dismissal was unmistakable. As Wilson guided Fiona and Tara toward the VIP viewing area he'd arranged for the water parade, Fiona felt the brief connection with her past, with freedom, slipping away. Yet Daniel's words echoed in her mind. "We would have helped." There had been options she never knew existed, alternatives to the gilded cage she now inhabited. More importantly, Tara's condition, while real, was manageable. The crisis that had driven Fiona to accept Wilson's proposal had been largely manufactured, a trap set by a man whose previous wife had mysteriously vanished. As she watched the lantern-lit boats glide across the darkening water, Fiona made a decision. She would find a way out for herself and Tara, but she would need to be as calculating and patient as Wilson himself had been. The opportunity to begin setting her plan in motion arrived unexpectedly when Wilson announced he was considering allowing Fiona to teach piano to select children from Silverwater's elite families. "It would enhance our social position," he explained over breakfast one morning. "The right connections are invaluable, and music lessons provide a natural entry point to certain circles. Besides," he added, studying her reaction, "it might give you a creative outlet beyond your personal practice time." Fiona kept her expression carefully neutral, though internally her mind raced with possibilities. "That's thoughtful of you." "Wilson, I'd enjoy teaching again." "I thought you might," he replied, pleased with her gratitude. "I'll have Melissa arrange the details. Naturally, all lessons will take place here in your music room." "Of course," Fiona agreed, already calculating how teaching might expand her restricted world, creating connections beyond Wilson's direct control. The lessons began the following week. Initially, Wilson or his assistant observed each session, but as the weeks passed and Fiona demonstrated perfect adherence to his expectations, the surveillance gradually relaxed. The children, sons and daughters of local judges, business leaders, and political figures, became Tara's first real friends since the move to Wilson's estate, transforming the isolated mansion into a place with occasional laughter and youthful energy. More importantly for Fiona, the parents who dropped off these children provided connections to the outside world, snippets of local gossip, and potential allies in her quietly forming escape plan. She was careful never to reveal anything questionable, maintaining her role as Wilson's elegant, accomplished wife, while gathering information and resources with painstaking patience. Can you imagine finding yourself trapped in a life you never wanted, married to someone who orchestrated your desperation, Have you or someone you know ever made a sacrifice that felt necessary at the time, only to discover it was based on manipulation? Share your thoughts in the comments. 6 months into the marriage, Wilson's business began facing unexpected challenges. A promising new drug failed clinical trials, federal investigations were rumored to be examining questionable research practices, and competitors were gaining ground in markets Wilson had previously dominated. The stress manifested in increasing control over his household, particularly Fiona. "You seem distracted lately," he commented one evening as they prepared for another charity function. "Is something troubling you?" Fiona met his gaze in the mirror as she fastened the sapphire earrings he'd selected to match her gown. "Not at all. I've been focused on the new teaching schedule and Tara's school projects." Wilson moved behind her, placing his hands on her shoulders, his grip just firm enough to remind her of his strength. "I notice you've been spending considerable time with Harriet recently, in the kitchen, learning to make those traditional preserves." "Tara enjoys helping with the cooking," Fiona replied, her pulse quickening though her expression remained serene. "It's become a Sunday tradition while you're golfing." "Traditions are important," Wilson agreed, his reflection studying hers. "So is loyalty, Fiona. I hope you remember that everyone in this household, Harriet included, works for me." The warning was clear, but it came too late. Fiona had already formed an unlikely alliance with the housekeeper, whose decades of service to the Blake family had given her both extensive knowledge of Wilson's affairs and a growing disillusionment with his methods. It was Harriet who had shown Fiona where Wilson kept important documents, who had taught her to make traditional fruit preserves on Sundays, while simultaneously teaching her about the various ways the security systems could be temporarily disrupted for maintenance. Most significantly, it was Harriet who had confirmed Fiona's suspicions about Catherine, Wilson's first wife. "She didn't disappear," Harriet had whispered during one of their Sunday preserving sessions, the kitchen machines running to mask. Their conversation from the audio surveillance. "She escaped. The mistress realized what kind of man she'd married too late, just like—" She'd trailed off, kneading dough with more force than necessary. "Just like me," Fiona had finished for her. "What happened to her? Is she alive?" Harriet had nodded almost imperceptibly. "Living under a different name in another state. The old Mrs. Blake, Wilson's mother, she helped Catherine get away. Said she wouldn't watch another young woman destroyed by her son's controlling nature." This revelation had shifted Fiona's understanding of Evelyn Blake, Wilson's elderly mother, who lived in the adjacent property on the estate. The formidable matriarch had initially treated Fiona with thinly veiled contempt, viewing her as a social climber who had entrapped her son. Their relationship had begun to thaw, however, when Fiona had helped nurse the older woman through a serious bout of pneumonia, applying traditional herbal remedies learned from Harriet, alongside the prescribed medical treatments. In Evelyn's convalescence, Fiona had glimpsed something unexpected in the older woman's eyes. Not just gratitude, but a flash of recognition, as if seeing herself or someone else from long ago reflected in Fiona's careful ministrations. Over cups of herbal tea that Fiona prepared according to Harriet's instructions, a tentative connection formed between the two women. "My son has always been particular about his possessions," Evelyn remarked one afternoon, her weathered hands cradling the delicate china teacup. "Even as a child, he couldn't bear to share his toys or have them arranged differently than he preferred." "Some people find comfort in order," Fiona replied carefully, sensing the conversation's undercurrents. "There's order, my dear, and then there's control," Evelyn said, her eyes sharp despite her physical frailty. "One maintains, the other diminishes." The cryptic comment lingered in Fiona's mind as she continued building her plan, piece by careful piece. Teaching had provided her with a small but growing income, carefully hidden in an account opened under the pretense of saving for special gifts for Wilson. The connections with her students' parents yielded valuable information about Wilson's business difficulties, which seemed to be mounting despite his efforts to conceal them. Most significantly, Fiona had begun recording Wilson's late-night business, calls conducted in his study, when he believed everyone else was asleep. Using a recording app on the new phone he'd given her, Ironically intended to monitor her communications, she captured conversations that revealed increasingly desperate and potentially illegal attempts to salvage his failing pharmaceutical ventures. The recordings themselves meant little to Fiona, who lacked the business acumen to understand their implications fully, but instinct told her they might prove valuable leverage when the time came to negotiate her freedom. That time approached, more rapidly than she had anticipated, when 9 months into their marriage, Wilson announced they would host a Christmas gala at the mansion, inviting Silverwater's elite alongside key business partners from across the country. "This will be our most important social event yet," Wilson informed her, stress evident in the tight lines around his mouth, despite his controlled demeanor. "Everything must be perfect. I've arranged for you to perform a special piece. Something original, I think. Can you compose something appropriate? Something as celebratory?" The request surprised Fiona. Wilson had always preferred she perform established classical pieces, showcasing her technical skill rather than her creative voice. "You want me to compose an original piece?" "Yes," Wilson confirmed, studying business reports rather than meeting her gaze. "Something that reflects well on our partnership. The Blake family musical legacy, if you will." Fiona recognized the opportunity immediately. "I'd be honored. I'll need additional practice time, of course." "Naturally," Wilson agreed absently, his attention clearly divided between her and the financial concerns he refused to discuss openly. The composition became Fiona's sanctuary and secret weapon. In the privacy of her music room, she poured every emotion of the past 9 months into the notes, the fear, the anger, the determination, but also, unexpectedly, hope. The piece evolved into a musical narrative of captivity and planned escape, though to untrained ears, it would simply sound like an impressive display of technique and emotion. Meanwhile, other elements of her plan advanced steadily. Through careful coordination with Harriet, she ensured copies of Tara's actual medical records were secured. Through her growing friendship with Evelyn, she gained insights into the financial structures Wilson had created to protect his assets, and the weaknesses in those structures that might be exploited. Most importantly, through Daniel, who had continued reaching out through the parents of Fiona's students, she established connections with a lawyer specializing in complex divorces and a therapist who documented cases of psychological control and manipulation. 2 weeks before the Christmas gala, while reviewing the final guest list with Wilson, Fiona deliberately mentioned the name of his former business partner, Lawrence Garrett. "I notice Mr. Garrett isn't included," she commented innocently. "I thought he was an important associate of yours." Wilson's expression darkened momentarily, before resetting to its customary pleasantness. "Lawrence and I had a falling out some years ago. Business disagreements that became personal." "I see," Fiona replied, feigning disinterest while mentally noting the reaction. Garrett's name had appeared several times in Wilson's late-night conversations, always in tones of barely suppressed anger. The following day, while Wilson attended a board meeting in the city, Fiona arranged for Tara to spend the afternoon with Evelyn, then used the secure phone Daniel had smuggled to her to contact Lawrence Garrett directly. "Mrs. Blake," Garrett's voice carried surprise and wariness in equal measure when the call connected. "This is unexpected." "I appreciate you taking my call, Mr. Garrett," Fiona replied, keeping her voice low despite knowing Wilson was miles away. "I believe we may have mutual interests regarding Wilson Blake." The conversation that followed provided the final pieces Fiona needed. Garrett, it seemed, had been forced out of the pharmaceutical company he and Wilson had founded together after discovering questionable research practices. He had documentation, but lacked the resources to challenge Wilson's legal team until now. "Your husband built his empire on manipulation, Mrs. Blake," Garrett told her. "Not just of business associates, but of data, of regulations, and yes, of people. I'm not surprised to hear he's done the same in his personal life." As the Christmas gala approached, Fiona maintained her perfect facade of devoted wife, while finalizing every detail of her plan. The house buzzed with preparations, decorators transforming the mansion into a winter wonderland, caterers planning elaborate menus, staff polishing silver and crystal to a blinding shine. Through it all, Fiona moved with serene efficiency, directing the chaos with the same precision she applied to her cello. Wilson, increasingly distracted by his business concerns, seemed pleased with her management of the household affairs, occasionally remarking that she had finally embraced her role properly. The observation would have stung months earlier. Now it simply confirmed that her performance was convincing. The night of the gala arrived with picture-perfect timing. A light snow began falling, just as the first guests arrived, dusting the estate with white powder that glittered under the outdoor lighting. Fiona greeted each arrival at Wilson's side, resplendent in an emerald gown he had selected, her hair arranged in an elegant updo that showcased the diamond earrings he had presented that morning as a token of appreciation for her efforts. The mansion, already impressive in its architecture, had been transformed into a showcase of wealth and taste. Crystal snowflakes hung from the ceilings, fresh pine garlands wrapped with twinkling lights adorned staircases and mantels, and a 20-foot Christmas tree dominated the main hall, decorated with ornaments rumored to have been handcrafted by European artisans. As the evening progressed, Fiona circulated among the guests with practiced charm, playing her role flawlessly while noting the subtle tensions among Wilson's business associates. Several cast glances his way that suggested concern rather than admiration, and whispered conversations ceased abruptly when she or Wilson approached. Tara made a brief appearance early in the evening, adorable in her holiday dress, charming Wilson's associates with her innocent enthusiasm before being escorted upstairs by Harriet for bedtime. The child had grown increasingly perceptive about the dynamics between her mother and Wilson, once asking Fiona in a whispered conversation why she never laughed the way she used to when they lived in their old apartment. The moment for Fiona's performance arrived midway through the evening. Wilson guided her to the grand piano positioned in the mansion's great room where her cello awaited. As guests gathered, he introduced her with proprietary pride. "My wife has prepared something special for us tonight," he announced, his hand resting possessively on her shoulder, "an original composition celebrating the holiday season, and if I may say, the successful partnership we've built together." Polite applause followed as Fiona took her seat, adjusting her gown and taking up her bow. She met Wilson's eyes briefly, allowing him to see what he interpreted as gratitude and devotion. Only she knew that what blazed in her heart was something altogether different. The piece began softly, almost tentatively, like a bird testing broken wings. The melody wandered through minor keys, conveying uncertainty and confinement without being obviously mournful. Gradually the tempo increased, the phrases becoming more complex and layered, building tension that reflected the mounting complications of Fiona's situation. At precisely the moment when the music seemed about to collapse under its own emotional weight, it transformed, not into triumphant major chords but into something more nuanced, a melody that acknowledged pain while refusing to be defined by it. The final movement incorporated subtle references to freedom songs and redemption themes that only a trained musician might recognize, concluding not with dramatic flourish, but with quiet, determined resolution that seemed to hang in the air even after the final note faded. The silence that followed lasted several heartbeats before applause erupted, scattered at first, then swelling as guests rose to their feet. Fiona noticed tears on some faces, expressions of recognition on others, as if her music had spoken directly to experiences they themselves had endured but never articulated. Wilson appeared beside her, beaming with the satisfaction of a collector whose prized possession has been appropriately admired. "Magnificent," he murmured as he helped her to her feet, addressing her but projecting his voice for nearby guests. "You've outdone yourself, my dear." "Thank you," Fiona replied, her smile genuine for the first time in months. It came from the heart. Later that night, after the last guests had departed and Wilson had retired to his study to make what he called essential international calls, Fiona stood at the window of her bedroom, watching snow continue to fall on the estate grounds. The mansion felt different somehow, as if her music had altered its very atmosphere, challenging the control that permeated its walls. In her mind, Fiona reviewed each element of her plan one final time. the documentation of Wilson's business improprieties secured in multiple locations. Tara's true medical records proving the exaggeration of her condition, the recordings of Wilson's increasingly desperate phone calls as his pharmaceutical empire began crumbling under regulatory scrutiny, the testimonies she had quietly arranged from household staff about the surveillance and control tactics employed in the mansion. Most importantly, she had secured guarantees of support, financial, legal, and emotional, from a network carefully built over months. Daniel and the orchestra community, Lawrence Garrett with his insider knowledge of Wilson's business practices, Evelyn Blake, whose complicated relationship with her son had evolved into quiet resistance against his methods, and Harriet, whose decades of loyal service had transformed into protection for the women who found themselves caught in Wilson's web. The final piece had fallen into place just days before the gala, when Dr. Chen had contacted Fiona through a carefully established, secure channel, offering his testimony about Wilson's manipulation of Tara's medical situation. The doctor, facing his own ethical crisis as federal investigations into Wilson's pharmaceutical practices expanded, had chosen to clear his conscience regarding his role in the deception. As Christmas week progressed, Wilson became increasingly preoccupied with business emergencies, spending hours locked in his study or traveling to emergency meetings. His control over the household loosened just enough for Fiona to make final preparations. Funds were transferred, documents secured, arrangements confirmed. She packed essentials in small batches, items that wouldn't be missed from her extensive wardrobe, along with Tara's favorite toys and books. The turning point arrived with unexpected symmetry on New Year's Eve, exactly 1 year after Wilson had first proposed his arrangement to Fiona. Silverwater's annual celebration centered around a tradition of families lighting candles along the waterfront, symbolizing hopes for the coming year. The entire town participated, from the wealthiest homeowners on the cliffs to the fishermen whose small cottages clustered near the harbor. "We should make an appearance," Wilson informed Fiona over breakfast, his tone making it clear this was not a suggestion. "The mayor specifically requested our presence. Apparently your performance at the Christmas gala has become quite the topic of conversation in town." "Of course," Fiona agreed readily. "I think Tara would enjoy the candle lighting." Wilson's phone chimed with yet another urgent message, distracting him from the flash of determination in Fiona's eyes. "I'll have Stevens bring the car around. At 7. We'll stay for the minimum appropriate time and return for our private celebration." The phrase contained the usual implication. Their celebration would consist of Wilson demonstrating his ownership in the most intimate and demeaning way possible. That evening, as they joined Silverwater's residence along the waterfront, Fiona felt an almost dizzying sense of anticipation. Wilson, distracted by constant updates on his phone and conversations with local officials, hoping to maintain his corporate presence in town, paid minimal attention to Fiona and Tara as they participated in the candle lighting. The harbor gleamed, with hundreds of tiny flames, each representing individual hopes for the year ahead. Tara's eyes shone with delight as she carefully placed their candles in the special holders arranged along the waterfront. "What are you wishing for, Mummy?" she asked, her small face serious in the flickering light. "Freedom," Fiona answered truthfully, knowing Wilson was too far away to hear, "and a chance for us both to live honestly." Tara nodded solemnly as, if understanding far more than her 6 years would suggest, "I wish for you to play your cello every day and smile with your eyes again." Fiona's heart constricted with love and determination. Tonight, everything would change. The perfect opportunity for her final move arrived when the mayor requested Wilson's presence at the podium to say a few words about his company's contributions to Silverwater. As Wilson stepped away, instructing Stevens to keep an eye on his family, Fiona leaned close to the driver who had become increasingly sympathetic to her situation over the months. "Tara isn't feeling well," she told him, concern evident in her voice. "The excitement and the cold. I think I should take her home before Wilson's speech. Would you mind bringing the car around? You can return for Wilson afterward." Stevens, whose own daughter had been one of Fiona's piano students, nodded understanding. "Of course, Mrs. Blake. I'll be right back." The execution of Fiona's escape occurred not with dramatic confrontation, but with quiet efficiency. By the time Wilson finished his speech and discovered his wife and daughter had departed early. They were already at the mansion, where Evelyn Blake awaited them, having dismisses most of the staff for the holiday. "He'll be furious," Fiona said as she quickly gathered the final items needed for their departure. "Let him be," the older woman replied, her aristocratic features hardened with resolve. "I've enabled his behavior for far too long. This ends tonight." When Wilson returned to find Fiona waiting in his study, her cello beside her and Tara nowhere in sight, confusion rather than anger registered first on his face. "What's this?" he demanded, loosening his tie as he entered. "Where's Tara?" "With your mother," Fiona replied calmly. "She's safe." Wilson's expression darkened. "I didn't authorize—" "No, you didn't," Fiona interrupted, her voice steady. "Just as you didn't authorize me to discover the truth about Tara's condition, or about Catherine, or about your business practices." The change that came over Wilson's face might have frightened Fiona months earlier, the mask of civilized control slipping to reveal cold fury beneath. Now she recognized it as the desperate anger of a man losing his grip on something he considered his property. "Whatever." "You think you know—" he began. "I know everything, Wilson," Fiona cut him off, rising from her seat. "I know you manipulated me by exaggerating Tara's condition. I know you orchestrated our chance meeting and deliberately targeted me after seeing me perform. I know about the federal investigations into your research protocols. I know what happened to Catherine and why." Wilson stepped toward her, menace in his movement. "You have no proof of anything, and more importantly, you have nowhere to go. Everything Tara has comes from me." "Not anymore," Fiona replied, gesturing to the folder on his desk. "Inside you'll find documentation of everything I've mentioned, along with the terms of our separation. You can agree to them, or you can face exposure on multiple fronts, personal and professional." Wilson flipped through the documents, his face paling slightly as he registered the extent of what Fiona had compiled. "You wouldn't dare. You'll get nothing if you try to fight me." "Look at the final page," Fiona instructed. The signature at the bottom, Evelyn Blake, seemed to hit Wilson physically. "My mother, she would never—" "She already has," Fiona said quietly. "She's transferring a significant portion of her personal fortune, which you can't touch, into a trust for Tara, and she's publicly supporting my account of our marriage if necessary." The silence stretched between them, tension vibrating in the air like a sustained note on Fiona's cello. Finally, Wilson sank into his chair, calculation replacing rage in his expression. "What exactly do you want?" he asked, his tone once again the businessman negotiating terms. "Freedom," Fiona answered simply. "Legal dissolution of our marriage with the settlement outlined in those papers, no contact with me beyond what's necessary for Tara's well-being, and your public acknowledgement that our separation was mutual and amicable." Wilson's laugh held no humor. "You expect me to simply let you walk away after everything I've invested in you?" "I expect you to recognize when you've lost," Fiona replied steadily. "Your business is facing investigation. Your mother has turned against you, and I have enough evidence to destroy whatever remains of your reputation." She paused. "Or you can accept these reasonable terms, maintain your dignity publicly, and focus on salvaging what you can of your company. Your choice." The final confrontation lasted hours, stretching well past midnight, as Wilson alternated between threats, pleas, and calculated offers intended to divide Fiona from her allies. She weathered each tactic with the patience of someone who had been preparing for this moment for months, neither yielding nor escalating, simply returning to the fundamental truth. Their marriage was over, and Wilson's only choice was how much he would lose in the process. As the first light of the new year crept through the study windows, Wilson finally signed the agreement, his hand steady, but his eyes haunted with the unfamiliar experience of defeat. "You won't succeed without me," he said, as Fiona gathered. "The documents. You've forgotten what it's like to stand on your own." Fiona met his gaze one last time, no longer afraid of his judgment or his anger. "That's where you're wrong, Wilson. I never forgot. I just remembered why it matters. The transition from Wilson's mansion back to independent life wasn't simple or immediate. Legal processes took time. Emotions, especially Tara's confusion about the changes, required patient navigation. But 6 months after that New Year's confrontation, Fiona and Tara were settled in a modest but comfortable apartment above the small music school Fiona had established, with seed funding from Evelyn Blake and support from the local arts community. The teaching that had begun as Wilson's strategy to enhance his social connections had transformed into Fiona's vocation and livelihood. Students of all ages and backgrounds filled her days, many receiving scholarships from a foundation established with portions of her settlement. Tara, now thriving in a new school environment, took particular delight in the community that formed around her mother's music. Surprisingly, Evelyn Blake had become a significant presence in their new life. The elderly woman, seemingly liberated by her stand against her son, visited regularly, her relationship with Tara evolving into the warm, grandmotherly connection the child had never experienced. Harriet, too, had chosen to leave Wilson's employment, now managing the practical aspects of Fiona's music school with the same efficient care she had once applied to the Blake mansion. The most significant change, however, was in Fiona herself. The woman who had entered Wilson's world desperate and afraid had emerged stronger, not despite her experience, but because of what it had taught her about her own resilience. Her music, once confined to the repertoire Wilson approved, now expanded in new directions as she composed and performed pieces that reflected her journey. On a warm June evening, almost 18 months after her escape, Fiona prepared for a special recital at Silverwater's Community Centre. Her students would perform first, showcasing their progress, followed by Fiona herself, premiering a new composition she had worked on for months. As she helped Tara with her dress, the child would turn pages for one of the advanced students. Fiona was struck by how different her daughter seemed from the worried little girl who had once created drawings of us being happy forever, as a wish rather than a reality. "Are you nervous about tonight, Mommy?" Tara asked, noticing Fiona's moment of reflection. "A little," Fiona admitted with a smile. "It's always a bit scary to share something new with the world." Tara nodded with the seriousness of a child who had seen more of life's complexities than most her age. "But it's good scary, right? Like climbing really high on the playground. Even though your tummy feels funny," Fiona laughed, the sound genuine and unrestricted. "Exactly like that. The best things often come with a little fear mixed in." The recital hall filled beyond capacity, with community members squeezing into standing room at the back. Daniel, who had recently invited Fiona to rejoin the orchestra as a featured soloist on her own terms, sat in the front row beside Dr. Chen, whose testimony had been instrumental in securing Fiona's freedom and who had since become Tara's primary physician, monitoring her manageable condition with honest care. Even Lawrence Garrett attended, his successful legal action against Wilson's pharmaceutical practices having resulted in substantial reforms within the industry and a whistleblower settlement that he had partly donated to Fiona's scholarship fund. As Fiona's students performed, each demonstrating not just technical skill, but the joy of musical expression, she felt a moment of clarity, unlike any she'd experienced before. The path that had led her here, through desperation, sacrifice, captivity, and ultimately liberation, had been neither straight nor easy. Yet standing now in this room filled with people connected by nothing but their love of music and community, she recognized that every step had been necessary to reach this place of authentic strength. When Fiona finally took the stage herself, cello cradled between her knees as naturally as an extension of her body, she gazed out at the audience, at Tara's beaming face, at Evelyn's dignified pride, at Harriet's steady presence, at Daniel's supportive smile, and felt something settle deep within her soul. "The piece I'm sharing tonight is called Authentic Measures," she explained, her voice clear and confident. "It's about discovering that sometimes what appears to be sacrifice is actually the path to freedom, and about remembering that true wealth comes not from what we possess, but from how honestly we live." As the first notes rose from her cello, Fiona closed her eyes, surrendering to the music that had sustained her through darkness and now celebrated her emergence into light. The melody spoke of loss and discovery, of constraints transformed into choices, of a journey from captive to creator. The audience rose in a standing ovation when she finished, tears flowing freely among those who had witnessed her transformation. Tara rushed forward, wrapping small arms around her mother with fierce pride, while around them the community that had become their true home expressed not just appreciation for the music, but recognition of the strength it represented. Later, that night, as Fiona tucked Tara into bed, the child asked a question that had clearly been on her mind for some time. "Mommy, why did we leave the big house and all those nice things we had with Uncle Wilson?" Fiona considered the question carefully, wanting to offer truth without burdening her daughter with adult complexities. "Because," she finally answered, "sometimes the things that seem valuable, big houses, expensive clothes, fancy parties, come with hidden costs, and sometimes the most important things, like being true to yourself and teaching others by example, can't be bought at any price." Tara nodded thoughtfully, processing this with the unique wisdom of children. "Like when you play your cello now, your eyes dance again," she observed, echoing her perception from months earlier. "That's worth more than a mansion, isn't it?" "Infinitely more," Fiona agreed, her heart full as she kissed her daughter's forehead. "Some call it authenticity, some call it integrity. I just call it freedom." As Tara drifted toward sleep, Fiona moved to the apartment's small balcony, gazing out at Silver Water's twinkling lights reflected in the harbor. Behind her, the modest rooms contained none of the luxury she had known in Wilson's mansion, yet they held something far more precious, the life she had chosen rather than the one she had been trapped into accepting. In the distance, she could just make out the silhouette of Wilson's estate on the cliffs above town. She had heard he was selling the property, preparing to relocate as his business continued to contract under regulatory scrutiny. The knowledge brought no satisfaction, only a quiet recognition that freedom came in many forms, and perhaps Wilson too was finding his own path toward whatever authentic life awaited him. Turning back to her apartment, to the student compositions waiting for her review, to Tara's school art projects displayed proudly on the refrigerator, to the cello standing in its place of honor by the window, Fiona felt the final pieces of her journey click into place. The woman who had once played silent scales on a windowsill now filled her world with music of her own creation. The mother who had sacrificed her autonomy for her child's well-being had ultimately shown that same child the true meaning of strength and self-respect. "Sometimes," she whispered to the night air, echoing the words she had shared with Tara, "what looks like sacrifice is actually the path to freedom." The gentle night breeze carried her words out over Silver Water, where candles would again line the harbor at year's end, each representing individual hopes. Fiona knew what her candle would symbolize this time, not a desperate wish for escape, but gratitude for the journey that had taught her that captivity, whether physical, financial, or emotional, could be transformed into liberation through patience, courage, and the unwavering belief in one's own worth. As stars appeared above the coastal town where her new life had taken root, Fiona realized that the music swelling within her was no longer a mournful refrain of what had been lost, but a triumphant composition celebrating what had been found. Not just survival, but the profound joy of living authentically on her own terms, creating a legacy of strength for her daughter and for herself. Congratulations, type 9 in the comments so that I know you stayed until the end with me. Thank you for watching, and until tomorrow's story on this same channel.